$700,000. Say that out loud for a second. $700,000. That's not a small number. That's decades of early mornings, late nights, jobs you stayed in longer than you wanted to, money you didn't spend, vacations you shortened, things you told yourself you'd do later. $700,000 is real. It means something. And if you're sitting somewhere close to that number right now, or working toward it, part of you probably feels like you've done what you were supposed to do. But here's the thing that doesn't get said clearly enough. That number, as real and as hard-earned as it is, might not be able to carry the full weight of what most people expect it to carry. Not if you plan to stop working completely. Not with the way costs move now. Not over a 25 or 30-year retirement. And the uncomfortable part isn't the math. The uncomfortable part is that about 1/3 of Americans your age have already figured this out. Quietly, without much announcement, and they've started doing something different. Not because they failed, not because they didn't save enough, but because they looked honestly at the numbers and made a different kind of decision. We're going to talk about what that decision looks like, and why, by the end of this, it might not feel like a concession at all. Let's start with the math, because the math is where the discomfort begins. The standard guidance for how much you can safely withdraw from retirement savings each year has hovered around 4% for a long time. It's called the 4% rule, and for decades it was treated almost like a law of nature. Save enough, withdraw 4% a year, and your money should last 30 years. Except in 2025, that rate has been revised down to around 3.9%. Doesn't sound like much, but on $700,000, that difference matters. At 3.9%, you're looking at roughly $27,300 a year in sustainable income from your savings. That's what the math says you can reliably pull out without running a serious risk of outliving your money. Now hold that number, $27,300. The average retired household in this country spends about $59,600 a year. That's what the Bureau of Labor Statistics data shows. Not wealthy retirees, not people living extravagantly, just average. Groceries, utilities, a car payment, property taxes, insurance, maybe a dinner out once a week. So you've got $27,300 coming in from your savings. You've got $59,600 going out the door every year. That's a gap of over $30,000 annually. And yes, Social Security helps close that gap for most people. But even with Social Security, the math gets tight. And it gets tighter the longer you live, and the more inflation eats into the purchasing power of what you have. If you're spending $60,000 a year and pulling from $700,000, that money runs out in roughly 15 years. Retire at 65, and you're looking at running low around 80. Spend $80,000 a year, which isn't unreasonable if you have a mortgage, grandchildren you like to help, or health issues that creep up. And that window shrinks to closer to 10 years. Those aren't projections designed to scare you. They're just what the numbers do when you run them honestly. And then there's the healthcare piece, which most retirement plans either underestimate or quietly ignore. Fidelity puts out an estimate every year of what the average 65-year-old will spend on healthcare over the course of retirement. Their 2025 number is $172,500 per person. That's not a worst-case scenario. That's not someone with a serious chronic illness. That's an average projection for a reasonably healthy person entering retirement at 65. Medicare premiums, co-pays, prescriptions, dental, vision, the things Medicare doesn't cover. And that figure doesn't include long-term care, which is its own separate, significant conversation. Right now, the average annual healthcare spending for Americans 65 and older runs about $7,800 a year, roughly 13% of a typical retiree's annual budget. On its own, that might feel manageable. but stack it against everything else, and it starts to take up a lot of space. Here's the part that's worth sitting with. That $172 to $500 over a retirement doesn't come at you evenly. It tends to backload. The early years of retirement are usually the healthier, cheaper years. The later years, when you're 78, 82, 85, that's when the costs accelerate, which means you need your $700,000 to still be there, still working, still reasonably intact when you need it most. If you've spent down the bulk of your savings in the first decade of retirement because you were withdrawing too much and had no other income, you arrive at the expensive years with very little buffer. That's the quiet danger in full retirement on $700,000. Not that you'll run out of money immediately, but that you'll spend it down in the years when you felt fine and arrive at the years when you don't feel fine with not much left. So that's where we are. A spending gap of $30,000 or more every year. A healthcare cost that rivals a small mortgage over the course of retirement. A withdrawal rate that, if you follow it honestly, gives you less than half of what you actually need to spend. And yet a lot of people are still planning to walk away from work entirely at 65 and figure it out from there. About 1/3 of them aren't, though. There's data from a 2024 workforce survey showing that 34% of workers 50 and older are now phasing into retirement rather than stopping completely. Not retiring in the traditional sense, not working full-time either. Something in between, reduced hours, consulting, part-time work in a field they already know, a slower exit rather than a hard stop. And here's the number that actually surprised me. A separate survey found that 47% of Americans now view retirement as a gradual transition. Only 38% still see it as a specific date when everything stops. The culture has already shifted. Quietly, without a lot of fanfare, a whole generation of Americans has started renegotiating what the word retirement actually means. They're not calling it failure. They're not calling it anything really. They're just doing it. There's a difference worth naming here. There's a difference between having to work and choosing to keep working on your own terms. Between staying in your field, doing something you're good at, working 20 hours a week instead of 45, and just grinding out a job because you have no other option. The people navigating this best aren't the ones who are most financially desperate. They're the ones who looked at both options honestly and decided that a slower exit on their own terms was actually the smarter and more sustainable path. What does that look like practically? It looks like the accountant who goes from full-time to 2 days a week, the project manager who takes on contract work for former clients, the nurse who shifts to per diem shifts instead of a full schedule, the teacher who tutors privately on her own schedule. It's familiar work at a pace you control, with income that takes real pressure off your savings. That relationship with Monday mornings changes completely. It's not dread. It's not exhaustion. It's something closer to structure, which, as it turns out, matters more than most people expect when you step back from full-time work. Now, here's where it gets more complicated, because once you start thinking about working part-time in retirement, you run into something that catches a lot of people off guard. Social Security has earnings limits, and if you're under your full retirement age and collecting benefits while also working, those limits matter quite a bit. In 2025, if you're under full retirement age for the entire year and you earn more than $23,400, Social Security withholds $1 in benefits for every $2 you earn above that threshold. So if you earn $33,400, which is only $10,000 over the limit, you lose $5,000 in Social Security benefits that year. That's not a penalty in the traditional sense. The withheld benefits do get credited back to you later, after you reach full retirement age through a slight increase in your monthly payment. But in the short term, It creates a cash flow problem that surprises people. They planned on both the work income and the full Social Security check. And suddenly, the math doesn't work the way they expected. The practical implication is this. If you're going to work part-time before full retirement age, while also collecting Social Security, you need to be deliberate about how much you earn. Staying at or just under $23,400 keeps the benefits intact. Going meaningfully over that number means you need to decide whether the additional work income is worth the temporary reduction in benefits. The good news, and there is good news here, is that the year you actually reach full retirement age, the limit jumps significantly. In 2025, it's $62,160 for that transition year. And once you've passed your full retirement age, the earnings limit disappears entirely. You can earn whatever you want with no impact on your Social Security benefits. So this is a timing and calibration question, not an insurmountable barrier. But it's the kind of thing that catches people who didn't plan for it. You decide to pick up some part-time consulting work. You earn more than you expected because the work was there, and you find out at tax time that your Social Security check was smaller than it should have been. Know the limits. Stay inside them if you need to. Plan your earning around them if you're in that window. Now, I want to tell you something that genuinely surprised the people who studied this, because it surprised me too. Part-time work in retirement isn't just financially better. It's physically and mentally healthier than stopping completely. There's a longitudinal study, peer-reviewed, published in a major journal, that followed retirees over time and compared the health outcomes of people who did what researchers call bridge employment, meaning they transitioned gradually through part-time work against people who retired fully and stopped working altogether. The people in bridge employment had fewer major diseases, better physical function, less cognitive decline, not because they were somehow special, but because the structure, the purpose, the daily engagement, and the social connection that work provides turned out to be genuinely protective. Here's the nuance that matters, though. The health benefits came specifically from career-related part-time work, staying in a field you know, doing something that uses your experience and keeps your mind engaged. Taking an unrelated part-time job, the kind that doesn't draw on who you are professionally, didn't carry the same benefits. That means the answer isn't just keep working any job, anywhere. The answer is staying connected to something meaningful, something that still asks something of you, something that still makes you feel like you have something to contribute. Think about what work actually does beyond the paycheck. It gives you a reason to get up at a specific time. It gives you people to talk to. It gives you problems to solve. It gives you a place where your experience and judgment actually count for something. Retirement, in the full stop version, removes all of that at once. And for a lot of people, that removal is harder than anyone told them it would be. There's research showing that retirement correlates with a decreased sense of purpose. That abrupt work cessation can trigger something that looks and feels like an identity crisis. That men in particular, who've often organized a significant portion of their self-understanding around their professional role, can struggle more than they expected when that role disappears overnight. Nobody puts that in the retirement brochure. A gradual transition doesn't just protect your savings. It gives your sense of self-time to adjust. It lets you figure out who you are when you're not working 45 hours a week, without forcing you to figure it all out at once. Let's come back to the money for a moment, because I want to be specific about what the timeline actually looks like at different spending levels. At $40,000 a year in spending, $700,000 lasts roughly 24 years. Retire at 65, you're covered to around 89. That's not bad. That's actually workable for a lot of people, especially if they have Social Security income on top of it and they keep their spending genuinely disciplined. At $60,000 a year, you're looking at about 15 years. Retire at 65, the money runs low around 80, which is, increasingly, not old. People are living into their late 80s and early 90s regularly now, at $80,000 a year. Again, not extravagant for someone with a mortgage or family expenses. You're looking at close to 10 years before serious depletion. What part-time work changes is the withdrawal rate. If you're earning $20,000 to $30,000 a year from part-time income, you're pulling significantly less from your savings, maybe nothing at all in some years. That $700,000 gets to sit there, stay invested, compound, and stretch. What would have lasted 15 years can now last 25 or 30. The math shifts dramatically when you stop asking your savings to carry 100% of your expenses. This is why 34% of people are doing it. Not because they love working, but because they ran the numbers and recognized that a modest amount of ongoing income is the most powerful lever they have for making their savings last. There's a fear underneath all of this that doesn't get named directly very often. It's not really the fear of running out of money. It's the fear of what running out of money actually means. It means losing your independence. It means making decisions based on what you can still afford rather than what you actually want. It means, at its worst, needing to lean on your kids, calling your daughter or your son, and having a conversation you never wanted to have. 68% of Americans now say they believe people should expect to work later in life for financial stability. That's not a pessimistic number. That's a realistic one. That's a country quietly adjusting its expectations to match the reality of what the numbers actually do. The generation retiring right now is rewriting the script, not loudly, not with a movement or a hashtag, just with the choices they're making week to week, year to year. Fewer of them are drawing a hard line at 65 and walking away. More of them are negotiating a different kind of exit, slower, more intentional, more on their own terms. And they're not talking about it like it's a sacrifice. They're talking about it like it's just what makes sense. So let's bring this to something honest and practical. $700,000 is a real number. It's a foundation. It's not nothing, and it's not a failure. But on its own, withdrawn at safe rates, stacked against average spending and average healthcare costs, it's a foundation that needs some additional support, especially in the first decade of retirement when the spending is highest and the compounding needs time to work. The support doesn't have to be a full second career. It doesn't have to be 40 hours a week. It can be 15 hours. It can be consulting on your own schedule. It can be staying connected to a field you've spent 30 years learning. It can look like a lot of different things, and it can fit around the actual retirement you want to have. The question worth sitting with isn't, is $700,000 enough? It's a more honest question. Can you afford, financially and personally, to stop working completely? For most people at this number, the answer is probably not, at least not in the first several years. The spending gap is real. The healthcare costs are real. The withdrawal math is real. But here's what's also real. The people who stay connected to meaningful work through their mid and late 60s tend to come out the other side of that period in better shape, financially, physically, and psychologically, than the people who stopped cold. Not because work is everything, but because the gradual exit is gentler, on your savings, on your health, on your sense of who you are. The people who navigate this chapter best aren't necessarily the ones who save the most. They're the ones who stayed flexible about what retirement was allowed to mean, who didn't hold too tightly to the idea that it had to look exactly one way on exactly one day. That flexibility, the willingness to say, I'll retire on my own terms at my own pace, turns out to be one of the most valuable things you can carry into this chapter. If something in this conversation shifted something for you, even a little, I'd be curious what you're thinking. Drop a number in the comments. 0 if you're planning to stop working completely. 1 if you're already considering some kind of partial work, some kind of phased exit. No explanation needed, just honest signal, because retirement is changing. Quietly, practically, and for a lot of people, better than the old version of it.